The music was playing, the guests were laughing, and my daughter's wedding seemed perfect. But then in the middle of the hall, her fiancé leaned over to his boss and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That's just my father-in-law, an unemployed loser." In that moment, everything changed. His words burned like fire in my head. He didn't know who I really was and what I was capable of. Because while everyone was laughing, I had already begun to plan. Not today, not tomorrow, but very soon he would pay, and he wouldn't even notice when the game began. Now the question for you, how do you think Johann will begin his revenge? Write your opinion in the comments. My name is Johann Keller, 55 years old, born and raised in Hamburg. All my life I worked hard, 40 years as an engineer in a mechanical engineering company. I worked overtime, sacrificed weekends, skipped vacations, all so that my daughter Sophie could have the life I never had. And today was her big day, her wedding, a moment I wanted to be proud of, a moment that was supposed to change everything, but not in the way I had expected. The hall was magnificently decorated, white flowers, a red carpet, chandeliers casting golden light over the guests. Sophie was radiant in her dress, so beautiful it almost brought me to tears. I thought all the suffering, all the work, all the lonely nights, it had been worth it. But then came the moment that broke me. The groom, Markus Vogel, a man in his late 20s with a perfectly styled haircut and arrogant eyes, led Sophie to the tables. He seemed proud, as if he already owned the whole world. Suddenly, I noticed him pulling his boss, Mr. Reinhard, aside. Reinhard, a man I only knew vaguely, a businessman with a lot of money and influence. Markus grinned and pointed a casual finger at me. "That there," he said loudly, "is my father-in-law, an unemployed failure. But don't worry, with me you've got the right man by your side." Silence. A few guests laughed uncertainly, others looked away. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. Reinhard slowly turned to me, looked me up and down and smiled. Then he put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and said, "In that case, you're fired." Marcus's face froze. He stammered, not immediately understanding what had happened. But Reinhard left no room for doubt. "I don't need anyone who belittles others to make themselves look bigger. Collect your things. You're out as of Monday." The laughter, the murmuring, the rising unrest. I heard nothing more. I only saw Marcus's angry face, his clenched lips, and I felt Sophie's confused gaze on me. But inside me there was no joy about his punishment. There was only shame, humiliation, a burning emptiness that cut deeper than any knife. Later that evening, Sophie came to me. Her eyes were shining, but her voice was cold. "Dad, couldn't you have just pretended everything was okay? Did you have to humiliate him like that?" Humiliate him? Those words bored into my heart. I had said nothing, done nothing, and yet she held me responsible. That night I sat alone in my small apartment, a bottle of whiskey in front of me, old photos of Sophie as a child beside me. How often had I gone without things for her? How many nights had I spent in the workshop just to give her a better life? And now I was an unemployed loser, a nobody. The city slept while a storm raged in my head. Every second, every laugh, every mocking face from that evening burned itself into my memory. Then I knew it couldn't end like this. Not for me, not for Johann Keller. I stood up, went to the window, and stared out into the darkness. "You've taken everything from me," I whispered. "Now I'll take everything back from you." A plan began to form inside me. Still vague, still unclear, but it was there, and it would grow. And when the time was ripe, Markus, Reinhard, even my own daughter would understand that you couldn't destroy Johann Keller with impunity. Because I was no longer a victim. I was the hunter, and the hunt had only just begun. The night after the wedding was quiet, but my head was in chaos that no sleep could dispel. I lay awake in my bed, stared at the ceiling, and kept hearing the words, "unemployed failure." Each syllable ate deeper into my heart. I finally got up, pacing restlessly through my small apartment. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from rage. At Markus, that inflated upstart. At Reinhard, who thought he could judge people based on a single sentence. But most of all at Sophie, my daughter, whom I had protected since she was born, whose tears I had dried, whose future I had built with my own hands. And she had looked at me as if I were the disgrace of the evening. "Couldn't you have pretended everything was okay?" Her voice echoed in my head, mocking, cold, alien. I grabbed the whiskey bottle from the previous night and took a deep swig. The burning in my throat was nothing compared to the burning in my chest. I saw the photos on the shelf. Sophie as a little girl, laughing on the beach, her small fingers in my hand. I had promised her then, no matter what happens, Dad will always be there for you. And now I was alone. A man without a job, without respect, without a family. A man who had been publicly stripped of his dignity. I sank into an armchair and closed my eyes. For a moment I saw Marcus's face in front of me, that smug grin. I saw Reinhard's eyes, heard Sophie's disappointed voice. My heart beat faster. "No," I murmured, "it doesn't end like this. Not for me." A thought began to grow in me. At first it was just a whisper, barely perceptible, but with every passing hour, it became louder, clearer, and unavoidable. Revenge. I stood up, drew the curtains, and sat down at the old desk I hadn't used for years. On it lay a notebook. Forgive, forget. I opened it and began to write. Names, places, memories, everything I knew about Markus and Reinhard. Markus grew up in Kiel, studied business administration, 3 years at Reinhard's firm. Ambitious, ruthless. He had met Sophie in a cafe, supposedly love at first sight. But I had sensed back then that he was more interested in her inheritance than in her herself. Reinhard, a businessman with a brilliant facade. But there were rumors. Black money, illegal real estate deals, bribery. I had never seen proof, but I knew that no one gets that rich without getting their hands dirty. I wrote and wrote until the sun slowly rose behind the rooftops. My hand hurt, my eyes burned, but inside I felt clarity for the first time in a long time. I would no longer be the victim. I would be the hunter. The next day I dressed inconspicuously. Simple clothes, no noticeable patterns. I took the train to the city center and sat in a cafe opposite Reinhard's office building. For hours I watched the entrance. Men in suits came and went. Young secretaries hurried with files. Expensive cars stopped out front. And then, around noon, Markus appeared. He looked stressed, spoke hectically on his phone, then disappeared into the building. I watched him like a predator, sizing up its prey. In that moment, I swore to myself I would take everything from Markus. His job, his wife, his reputation, and Reinhard, he would fall. Slowly, piece by piece, until he had nothing left worth fighting for. But I also knew I couldn't be careless. One wrong step and they would destroy me before I even began. I had to remain in the shadows, invisible, until the right moment came. In the evening, I returned home. I took out my phone, searched the internet for articles about Reinhard. Nothing conspicuous, just the usual hymns of praise about his success. But in an old report, I found a clue. 5 years ago, he had been involved in a scandal, a construction project where workers were employed illegally. The case never went to court. "There's something there," I murmured. "Somewhere there is proof, somewhere there are cracks in his shiny facade." I spent the next few days gathering information. I spoke with old colleagues who knew Markus from the company. Some just laughed and said he was arrogant, but one, a former accountant, mentioned something interesting. Markus had access to clients who didn't officially appear in the books. My heart beat faster. Illegal clients, money laundering, perhaps even evidence of Reinhard's shady dealings. I knew I wasn't strong enough yet to strike directly, but I was on the right track. Every clue, every trace brought me closer to my goal. In the nights, I sat back at the desk, drawing plans, writing down strategies. I studied Markus's every move, Reinhard's every public appearance. I learned their habits, their weaknesses, and with each day, the certainty grew in me. I was no unemployed failure. I was the shadow that would devour them both. At the end of the week, I stood again at the window, looking out at Hamburg's dark streets. The city seemed peaceful, but a war was raging inside me. "It has begun," I whispered, "and no one will see it coming." The days after my decision passed as if in a fog, but I was no longer the same man. I no longer got up in the morning to stare aimlessly around my empty apartment. No, I had a goal sharper than any knife. I began to follow traces. Marcus was easy to observe. He was young, greedy, and careless. Every morning he appeared at around 9 a.m. at Reinhardt's office building, usually with a coffee to go in his hand and a smug grin on his face. I followed him from a distance, never too close, but close enough to recognize patterns. On Wednesdays, for example, he always left the building a bit early and disappeared into a bar in the Schanzenviertel district. There he met with colleagues, drank beer, boasted about his successes. I sat at a table in the background, listened to him laugh, heard him boast about numbers no normal employee should mention. "Reinhardt trusts me more than anyone else," he once said drunkenly, the words stumbling over his lips. "I have access to clients nobody knows. Understand? Nobody." The men around him laughed as if it were just a joke, but I heard the truth in it. I took notes. Every little thing, every pattern. Reinhardt himself was more difficult. He lived in a villa on the outskirts, guarded by cameras and high walls. But no system is perfect. I positioned myself nearby at night, observed the movements of the guards, the times when lights went on and off. Soon I knew that around 2 a.m., the house was at its quietest. But I didn't want to break in, not yet. I wanted information. I wanted to understand how deep his connections went. So I began to dig into the past. Archives, old newspapers, court records. In the dusty corners of the city library, I found articles about Reinhardt's early years as a construction entrepreneur. There was a pattern: dubious investors, projects that were suddenly stopped, workers who disappeared overnight. No one had ever asked too many questions. Too much money, too much influence. But then I stumbled upon a name that kept repeating: Karl Dietrich, a former partner who had suddenly disappeared from all records. No photos, no mentions after 2012. It was as if someone had erased his existence. Why? I wrote the name in my notebook, thick in red. I knew if I wanted to learn the truth about Reinhardt, I had to find Karl Dietrich. But how do you find a man who has been erased from the world? The answer came to me at night as I sat in my armchair again, leafing through the old notebook. Contacts, old colleagues, people who had seen more than they would admit. The next day, I called my old friend Matthias, a journalist I had spoken to years ago about corruption in the construction industry. He was surprised to hear my voice. "Johann, man, I thought you'd moved to southern Germany long ago." "No," I said tersely. "I need your help. It's about Reinhardt." It went quiet on the other end. Then I just heard a soft sigh. "Reinhardt, you don't really want to mess with him, do you?" "Yes," I replied, "and I think you have documents that could help me." We met late in the evening in a small cafe by the harbor. Matthias looked older, more tired, but his eyes sparkled when he heard Reinhardt's name. "I tried back then," he said, "but every time I wanted to write an article about him, I got calls, threats. My editor-in-chief suppressed everything, but I kept copies." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it in front of me. Inside were old documents, photos, notes. And there it was again, the name Karl Dietrich. Dietrich was Reinhardt's right-hand man, Matthias explained, but something went wrong. A project in Poland, money laundering, missing millions. Shortly after, he was gone, without a trace. Some say Reinhardt got rid of him. Others believe Dietrich went into hiding. No one knows. I leafed through the documents, saw bank connections, old construction plans, invoices, and then a photo. A young Marcus, maybe in his mid-20s, next to Reinhardt, and a man I could only identify as Karl Dietrich. My heartbeat accelerated. So Marcus was deeper involved in these dealings than I had thought. He wasn't just a simple employee, he was part of a network. I thanked Matthias, stored the documents safely under my jacket, and headed home. But already on the street I felt it. Someone was watching me, a shadow behind me, footsteps falling in the same rhythm as mine. I turned into a side street, stopped suddenly. The footsteps halted. A tall man in a dark coat stood in the shadows, smoking. He acted as if he belonged there, but I knew better. They had noticed. Someone had noticed I was digging into their past. I walked on as if nothing had happened, but the certainty grew inside me. The path I had taken was dangerous. Every step could be my last, but I couldn't turn back. Not anymore. Too much had been said. Too much had been broken. Back home, I laid the documents on the table, stared at them until the numbers and names blurred before my eyes. "This is just the beginning," I whispered. And in that moment, I knew that soon I would no longer be standing in the shadow. Soon, Markus and Reinhard would realize that someone had understood their game, and that someone was me. I spent the next few days almost exclusively working through the documents from Matthias. Every page, every marginal note, every date could be a key. The deeper I delved, the clearer the picture became. Reinhard had built a network that extended far beyond Hamburg. Companies in Poland, shell companies in Luxembourg, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. A spider's web, and Markus was right in the middle of it. It was like a cold revelation. While Sophie had believed in fairy tale weddings and romantic promises, Markus had long been entangled in a world of corruption, money laundering, and blackmail. He wasn't just an arrogant son-in-law, he was an accomplice. But that was only half the truth. I wanted to understand how the system worked. Who profited, who protected them, who pulled the strings. So I began to use contacts from my old days as an engineer. I had once supervised projects supplied by Reinhard's firm. I remembered subcontractors, site managers who had whispered about strange invoices back then. I called one of them, Rainer Hoffman, a retired site manager, old but not forgetful. We arranged to meet in an inconspicuous pub on the outskirts. He arrived with his head bowed, as if afraid of even being seen. "Johann," he muttered, "you really want to dig into this matter?" "Yes," I said firmly, "and I need answers." He took a sip of beer, looked around nervously. "Reinhard has his fingers everywhere. Politicians, banks, even the police. If you think you can just expose him, you're mistaken. Most who tried have disappeared." I leaned forward. "Then tell me about Karl Dietrich." Reiner's face froze. His hand clenched the glass. Dietrich was the only one who could stand up to Reinhard, the only one who really knew how deep the swamp was. And then, after that Poland project, he was gone. Some say Reinhard sent him abroad. Others, well, he broke off. "Others say what?" I pressed. Reiner looked at me with tired eyes. "Others say he's at the bottom of the Elbe." I felt my stomach tighten. Was Dietrich dead, or was he hiding somewhere out of fear of Reinhard? One question remained open, and I swore to myself I would find the answer. In the following weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the inconspicuous, unemployed man walking through Hamburg's streets. But at night, I transformed into something else, a shadow studying Reinhard's network. I observed the villa, the nocturnal movements, the expensive cars coming and going at ungodly hours. I eavesdropped on conversations by sitting in bars and restaurants frequented by Reinhard's people. They spoke in riddles, but I learned to read between the lines, and one name kept appearing, quietly, barely audible, but persistently, Project Aurora. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was important. One evening, while eavesdropping on Markus again in the Schanzenviertel bar, something unexpected happened. He had drunk too much, boasting as usual. But this time he let slip a remark that electrified me. "If Aurora works," he slurred, "then we'll all be sitting on a gold mine. Reinhard says this will be our biggest coup." Aurora. That was it. The heart of the network. I acted as if I were casually taking my jacket and leaving, but my pulse raced. I knew if I understood Aurora, I could destroy Reinhard and Markus. In the nights that followed, I searched for clues online, in company registries, in construction plans. Nothing. Aurora was like a ghost. No official trace, no entries. Until one night I decided to risk more. I sneaked onto a construction site officially belonging to Reinhard's firm, a half-finished high-rise at the harbor. The fences were high, but I was slimmer, more agile than I would have credited myself. I climbed over, slipped through the shadows. Inside, I found containers with filing cabinets. Most contained banal material lists, construction plans, but in one of the cabinets, I stumbled upon a folder with just one word on it, Aurora. My heart thundered. I opened it carefully. Inside were secret financial plans, transfers, encrypted documents, and a clue. Aurora opening Q or Warsaw. Warsaw, exactly where Karl Dietrich had last been seen. I copied as many pages as possible with my old digital camera. Then I put everything back so no one would notice. But just as I was about to leave the container, I heard footsteps. 2 men, security guards, their voices getting closer. "You hear? Reinhard wants to check in personally next week." No wonder Aurora is too important. I pressed myself into the shadows, held my breath. The men walked past without noticing me, but my heart was beating so loud I feared they might hear it. When they were gone, I ran back, climbed over the fence, and disappeared into the darkness. Back home, I laid the documents on the table. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from excitement. I was closer than ever before. Aurora was the key. If I exposed the project, the whole house of cards would collapse. But at the same time, I knew I was in dangerous territory. Reinhard would destroy anyone who even mentioned Aurora. And Markus, he was too greedy, too proud to give up. I leaned back, closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Now Markus, now Reinhard, the game has truly begun. And deep inside, I felt that I was no longer just out for revenge. I wanted more. I wanted to see their entire empire burn. I had spread the documents about Project Aurora on the table, each page read multiple times. Warsaw, secret accounts, encrypted documents, everything pointed to it being a massive money laundering project. Reinhard wanted to clean black money through construction projects, and Markus was in the middle of it. But evidence alone meant nothing. It had to appear at the right time, in the right place, and it had to look like it didn't come from me. I couldn't fight openly. I had to beat them with their own weapons, lies, intrigue, manipulation. So I began to devise a plan. My first target was Markus. He was weak, arrogant, and careless, the perfect entry point. I got myself a simple disguise, a suit from a second-hand store, a wig, glasses. No one in Hamburg paid attention to just another businessman with a briefcase. Then I went to a small print shop where I played with the copied documents from the container. I made copies, altered numbers, forged logos, not everything, just enough to look real. In the end, I held a document in my hand that looked as if Markus had secretly moved millions to Warsaw without Reinhard's knowledge. A targeted stab, but one document wasn't enough. I needed a way to get it into the right hands. Markus had to stumble upon it himself, or better yet, someone had to give him a hint. For that, I visited the bar in the Schanzenviertel, where Markus often drank after work. I sat at the counter, waited for hours. Then around 10, he arrived as always. Shirt unbuttoned, casual grin, a few colleagues in tow. They ordered beer, laughed loudly, made jokes about women and money. I listened inconspicuously. Then when Markus went to the restroom, I followed him. In the anteroom, I stopped, waited until he was in the stall. Quickly, I slipped the forged envelope into his briefcase, which was carelessly left by the sink. Then I left the bar without looking back. The next morning, I sat in the cafe opposite Reinhard's office building. Markus appeared as usual, but this time he seemed nervous. He held the envelope in his hand, ripped it open. His face turned pale. He looked around hectically, stuffed the papers back into his bag, and hurried inside. My heart raced. I couldn't hear him, but I could imagine him standing in front of Reinhard, stammering, trying to explain. And Reinhard, suspicious, cold, calculating, would question everything. In the following days, I saw Markus alone more often. No more colleagues, no loud evenings at the bar. He looked harried, chain-smoked, often stared into space. I knew the seed of mistrust was sown, but I couldn't be too hasty. I had to wait, to observe. A week later, I received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was deep, unfamiliar, but insistent. "Herr Keller." I froze. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows you're asking questions. Meet me tomorrow, 11 p.m. The old harbor crane, alone." The line went dead. I sat motionless for a long time. Who was that? An ally? A trap? Perhaps someone from Reinhard's circle who had had enough. The next evening I went. The old crane at the harbor had been shut down for years, rusty, abandoned. The wind whistled through the iron girders. Darkness lay over the scene like a cloak. Suddenly, a man stepped out of the shadows, tall, gaunt, with deep bags under his eyes. He looked worn, as if he had spent years in hell. "You are Keller," he said. It wasn't a question but a statement. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "And you are—" He hesitated. "Carl Dietrich." My heart skipped a beat. He was alive. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Reinhard will destroy you if he finds out you're digging." "Why did you disappear?" I asked. "Because I had to," he said bitterly. "I saw too much. Aurora is bigger than you think. It's not just about money. It's about power, politics, gangs, construction. Everything is connected. Reinhard is just a player, but he's the most brutal one." I wanted to know more, but Dietrich grabbed my arm. "You have a daughter, right?" "Yes." "Then listen, if you continue, she will be the one to pay. Reinhard always attacks the weakest." His words burned into my brain. I felt real fear for Sophie, but at the same time, anger grew. Markus, Reinhard, this whole network, they thought they could destroy anything and anyone. "Then I'll tell you one thing," I growled. "If you even look at my daughter, I'll bring you all down, one after the other." Dietrich studied me for a long time, then nodded. "Then you'll need more than courage. You need proof. Here." He pressed a small USB stick into my hand. "Everything I managed to save before I had to disappear. Aurora, Reinhard, Markus. But be careful. If he realizes this is in circulation, he will hunt you." Then he disappeared as suddenly as he had come, merging with the shadows of the harbor. I stood there, the stick in my hand, and knew this was no longer a game. This was war. Back home, I plugged the stick into my old laptop. Files opened, accounts, transactions, contracts, but also videos, secret recordings of meetings between Reinhard and politicians, conversations about bribery, threats against competitors. I leaned back, breathing heavily. This was it, the key, the weapon, but I couldn't use it immediately. No, I had to be smart. If I struck too early, they would cover everything up. If I did it right, they would tear each other apart. And as night fell over Hamburg outside, I swore to myself, Markus would be the first. I would isolate him, expose him, break him, just as he had humiliated me in front of everyone. And for Reinhard, I would save something special. Markus was nervous. You could see it in his every movement, hear it in his voice, sense it in his presence. He wore fear like a badly fitting garment. From my spot in the cafe opposite, I could watch his every step. Every morning he appeared punctually at 8, but he was no longer the same man who had once strutted through the door so arrogantly. He walked hunched over, constantly looked around, and when he spoke with Reinhard, he avoided his gaze. The seed had sprouted. I knew the USB stick in my drawer was more than just a collection of data. It was a bomb, but the time wasn't right to detonate it yet. First, I wanted to see Markus break under Reinhard's watchful eye, and he did. Just a few days after my last meeting with Dietrich, I saw Markus sitting alone in the bar late at night. No loud laughter, no friends, just him with a glass of whiskey and a vacant stare. He spoke little, chewed nervously on his fingernails, and grabbed his phone every time it vibrated, only to throw it back on the table. I decided to push him a little further into the abyss. For that, I needed just one more little nudge. So I got an old prepaid SIM card, bought a cheap burner phone, and sent him the first message. "Does Reinhard know about your accounts in Warsaw?" No signature, no trace, just a sentence. I imagined him reading it, his heart racing, sweat beating on his forehead. Minutes later, the reply came, "Who is this?" I didn't write back. The next day I saw him again. He walked hurriedly, talked on the phone hectically, his voice shrill. He was talking to someone about rumors, about uncertainties. Reinhard must have already become suspicious. And indeed, 2 days later it happened. I was sitting in the cafe as usual when Markus was called into Reinhard's office. Less than 30 minutes later, the door flew open again. Reinhard stepped out, pale, with a cold gaze. And Markus behind him, red in the face, hands trembling. They argued right there on the street. Reinhard yelled, "If you're lying to me, Markus, you're finished." Passers-by stopped. Markus tried to placate him, but Reinhard turned away, got into his car, and drove off. I couldn't help but smile. The rift between them was now visible, and it would widen until the whole facade crumbled. But I also knew the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. Reinhard wasn't stupid. He would soon realize someone was pulling the strings in the background. And that happened faster than I thought. On the third night after the argument, I heard a noise outside my apartment, a motor being turned off, the quiet crunch of footsteps on gravel. I turned off the light, moved the curtain aside, and looked out. A black car was parked on the other side of the street. Inside, two men I had never seen before. Broad-shouldered, ruthless. Only the glowing tips of their cigarettes lit up the darkness. They didn't drive away. They stayed there the whole night. I understood the message immediately. Reinhard was having me watched. Maybe Markus had said something. Maybe it was just suspicion. But he had me in his sights. In the morning, the car was gone. But my determination grew. I couldn't turn back now. I had crossed the line long ago. I decided to corner Markus completely. I wanted him to make mistakes, to panic so much that he himself raised the dagger against Reinhard. So I took the burner phone again and wrote, "It's not Reinhard who is betraying you. You are betraying yourself. Soon he will know everything." This time I waited for the reply. "What do you want from me?" I wrote back simply, "Aurora." No further explanations, no hints. The next few days became hell for Markus. I saw him running through the streets sweating, arguing with colleagues, even making himself small in front of my daughter when she spoke to him. She sensed something was wrong. I heard her once on the phone saying, "Markus, you're not yourself anymore. What are you hiding from me?" And he yelled at her for the first time. My heart constricted. It hurt to see so much suffering, even if it was part of my plan. But I couldn't show weakness. Not yet. Then came the moment I had hoped for. One evening, Markus drove off in a panic, far too fast, hands trembling on the wheel. I followed him at a safe distance. He didn't drive home, not to the office, but out to the old industrial harbor. There he parked and got out. And then, out of the shadows, stepped Reinhard. They spoke vehemently. I couldn't hear the words, but their gestures were clear. Reinhard was shouting. Markus tried to explain, but the older man grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the hood of the car. I held my breath. Would Reinhard finish him off now? But then he let go, got into his car, and drove away. Markus remained behind, gasping, trembling, like a man who had just danced with death. I knew he had little time left. Reinhard would soon drop him, but that wasn't enough for me. I wanted Markus to shatter the chains binding him to Reinhard himself, to make a mistake in his desperation that would bring everything crashing down. I had the USB stick, I had the evidence, but I wouldn't publish it yet. No, I would feed it to Markus, piece by piece, and he would believe he had found a way out, while in truth he was only sinking deeper into the trap. Because in this spiral of fear, there was no escape, and I, Johann Keller, was the one tightening the screws. Markus was no longer the man Sophie had married. He was a wreck. Dark circles hung under his eyes like shadows. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his breath heavy with alcohol. I saw him arrive in front of Reinhard's office that morning. Late, unsteady, hands trembling. Reinhard was already waiting, arms crossed, his gaze icy. They disappeared inside the building, and less than 20 minutes later, Markus stormed out again. This time he held nothing back. He punched the glass facade angrily, shouted words I couldn't understand, then got into his car and sped away. It was time. The cracks had become open wounds. That evening, Sophie called me. Her voice was brittle, full of tears. "Dad, something's wrong with Markus. He just screams, barely sleeps. He says someone is following him. I don't know what to do anymore." I gritted my teeth, my heart constricted hearing her sob. A part of me wanted to tell her the truth, that Markus was destroying himself because I was pulling the strings. But I remained silent. "Stay strong, Sophie," I murmured. "It will be over soon." She didn't understand my words, but I knew she would get clarity soon. The next day I continued my plan. I had a second package delivered to Markus. This time, a USB stick in a plain envelope. On it, a video. It showed Reinhard, recorded at a private meeting with a city councilman, handing over envelopes full of cash. The recording was from Dietrich's collection. I edited it so that Markus would get the impression Reinhard had used him as a scapegoat. I left the stick in his mailbox. No sender, no hints, just the video. And I waited. That evening from my car, I watched as Markus entered the living room. Sophie was next to him. He was pale, his hands trembling as he plugged the stick into his laptop. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw Sophie's face. First confusion, then horror. She shook her head, screamed at him, pushed him away. Markus tried to calm her, but she grabbed her bag and stormed out. Tears streamed down her face. She ran into the darkness, and I saw the final break in his eyes. He was alone, and a desperate, lonely man makes mistakes. In the days that followed, Markus plunged into chaos. He no longer showed up at the office. Reinhard sent men to look for him, but he avoided them. Instead, he drifted through bars, talked about conspiracies, about betrayal. Some thought he was crazy, others drunk. But I knew he was on the verge of taking the final step, confronting Reinhard openly. And that's exactly what I wanted. Because while Markus was drowning in his own fear, I was preparing the next stage. I had the evidence. I had the contacts. Through an old friend at the local newspaper, I leaked an anonymous dossier excerpts from the Aurora files, forged invoices that implicated Reinhard directly. Not too much, just enough to fuel rumors. 3 days later, the first article appeared. Major businessman Reinhard involved in corruption scandal. It was like a stone thrown into water. Small waves spread. Politicians denied, journalists dug deeper. And Reinhard, he was boiling with rage. I watched him seek out Markus in a cafe. He grabbed him by the arm, pulled him into a corner. I could read their lips. "Was it you?" Markus shook his head desperately, but Reinhard didn't believe him. From that point on, Markus was a risk to him, and I knew his end was near. But two voices fought inside me. One said, "Good, he deserves it." The other whispered, "Sophie will break if he falls." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, looking at the USB stick with the final evidence. I held the power in my hands. Markus, Reinhard, the whole network, I could bring it all down with this. But the price, my daughter would see that her own father was behind it all. Still, there was no way back. I was in too deep. So I decided to give Markus one last push. Not fatal, not yet, but enough for Reinhard to finally lose all faith in him. I forged another email, this time directly to Reinhard. Content, hints that Markus was cooperating with the police, that he was ready to spill everything. I sent it from an anonymous account. The next morning, a black car stood in front of Markus's house. Men got out, stormed inside. I heard screams, saw them drag him out. Sophie was there too. She tried to throw herself between him and the men, but was brutally pushed aside. I reached for the car door, ready to run out, but I stopped. If I interfered, it would all be over. So I watched as Markus was shoved into the car and disappeared. Sophie knelt on the street. Tears streamed down her face, her hands bloody from the fall. My heart cried out for her, but I couldn't. Not yet, because the fall had begun, and Markus was only the beginning. Markus had disappeared. No sign of life, no message, nothing. Sophie searched desperately for him, called friends, went to bars, asked neighbors. All in vain. He had vanished from the face of the earth. I knew who was behind it. Reinhard had taken him out of the game because he had become too risky. For me, that was the moment the tide finally turned. Reinhard thought he had control, but in truth, he had just set his own downfall in motion. I sat in my small apartment, windows darkened, laptop open. On the screen were dozens of files, videos, bank statements, intercepted conversations, all from Dietrich's USB stick. I knew if I released it all at once, Reinhard would collapse like a house of cards. But that would be too simple, too fast. No, I wanted him to burn slowly, to lose more each day until he choked in the flames of his own greed. So I played my big game. First, I sent an anonymous letter to the public prosecutor's office, A few pages from the Aurora documents. Just enough to spark curiosity. No direct evidence, just questions. Questions dangerous enough to set investigators in motion. 2 days later, TV news reported, public prosecutor investigating construction entrepreneur Reinhardt on suspicion of corruption. Reinhardt immediately denied it, appeared before cameras, spoke of ridiculous accusations and political intrigue. But the seed was sown. The press smelled blood. I gave them the next push. A video of Reinhardt at a meeting with a bank director. Envelopes changed hands, numbers were whispered. I uploaded it to an anonymous forum. Within hours it spread like wildfire. Reinhardt panicked. I saw him on TV, addressing the press, face red, hands trembling. "A forgery!" he roared. But the louder he screamed, the less people believed him. His investors pulled out. Banks froze credit. Politicians who had stood by his side yesterday suddenly turned away. And Marcus, no trace. But I knew sooner or later he would reappear, broken, shattered. Perhaps as a witness, perhaps as a corpse. As Reinhardt's empire slowly crumbled, he began to fight back. One night, as I returned from a meeting with my informant, my apartment door was open. The lock was broken. I stepped in cautiously. The drawers were rifled through, the hard drives gone, the desk vandalized. They had been here, Reinhardt's men. I reached for my jacket, but then I noticed it. On the table lay a single note. In black ink it said, "We know who you are." My blood ran cold. They were closer than I thought. But instead of fear, rage boiled up inside me. They had violated my home, my refuge. That was a mistake they would regret. The next day, Sophie called again. Her voice was panicked. "Dad, I'm scared. For 2 days, there's been a black car in front of my house. Strange men are watching me. I don't know what to do anymore." My heart skipped a beat. Reinhardt was starting to target her, just as Dietrich had prophesied. "Listen to me carefully, Sophie," I said quietly. "Stay calm. Don't go anywhere alone. Trust no one but me." I knew if Reinhardt got even a hint that I was behind the revelations, he would use my daughter to break me. And that must not happen. So I changed my strategy. Until now, I had acted from the shadows, quietly pulling strings. Now it was time to become more visible, but still invisible enough that no one knew my name. I created an anonymous online profile, called myself Aurora Whistle. From this account, I began publishing new documents daily. Evidence of corruption, illegal deals, money laundering. The press pounced on it like hungry wolves. Reinhardt was suddenly on everyone's lips. The headlines escalated. Reinhardt bribes politicians. Secret offshore accounts revealed. Aurora project, Hamburg's biggest scandal. It was as if I had triggered an avalanche. But with each new revelation, the danger also grew. Reinhardt put detectives on me, paid hackers to find my trail online. I constantly changed devices, SIM cards, internet cafes. It was a game of cat and mouse, and the cat was hungry. Then one evening I received an unexpected message. Sender unknown. Content. We have Marcus. If you want to see him, come tomorrow midnight. Old warehouse at the harbor. No doubt it was a trap, but also a chance. Marcus was alive, and if I found him, he might provide the final piece to bring Reinhardt down for good. I sat in the dark for a long time, the message in front of me. Every step could mean my end. But the thought of Sophie, of the humiliation at her wedding, of the years that had been taken from me, left no room for retreat. I grabbed my jacket, slipped a small camera into the inside pocket, my phone, the USB stick. Then I whispered into the night, "Reinhardt, now the real game begins." The night over Hamburg was cold and clear. The harbor smelled of oil and salt. Mist drifted over the water as I approached the old warehouse. The building lay abandoned, windows broken, the gate half rusted shut. Perfect for a trap. Perfect for a final game. I parked the car a few streets away, pulled my hood deep over my face, and checked my camera. Every step could be my last, but I was ready. When I pushed the warehouse gate open, I immediately heard the crunch of my footsteps on the concrete floor. It was dead silent except for the dripping of water somewhere in the darkness. "Marcus?" I whispered. No answer, just an echo. Then suddenly a cough. weak from behind the old metal shelves. I ran over and there he was. Markus sat tied to a chair, his face bloody, his eyes swollen. He seemed half-conscious but alive. "Johann," he croaked, "you shouldn't have come." I bent down to him, started untying the ropes. "Quiet. We're getting out of here. I've got you." But at that moment something clicked behind me. Metallic, unmistakable, a weapon. "Very touching," said a deep voice. "But the game is over." I turned around slowly and there he stood, Reinhard in a black coat, the pistol aimed directly at me. Next to him, two of his men brought his wardrobes. His face was twisted with anger, his eyes cold as steel. "You really thought you could destroy me? A few ridiculous files, a few anonymous posts? Do you think I built my empire without keeping rats like you in check?" I remained silent, just looked at him. Every muscle in my body tense, my heart hammered. Reinhard stepped closer, the weapon now less than 2 meters away. "Tell me, Johann, what exactly did you want to achieve? Did you want to publicly humiliate me, ruin me, enhance your miserable life?" A bitter smile formed on my lips. "No, I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose everything, just like you did to me." A twitch crossed his face. For just a moment, but I saw it. Surprise, maybe even fear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snarled. "I have judges in my pocket, ministers, police officers. Do you think your little games mean anything?" "They mean everything," I said quietly. "Because this time, you've chosen the wrong opponent." Before he could react, I reached into my jacket, not for a weapon, but for my phone. A press of a button, and a soft click sounded. Reinhard frowned. "What?" I pointed to the small camera on my jacket. The red light was blinking. "Everything you just said is being live-streamed to a server, and tomorrow it will be everywhere." His eyes widened. For a split second, I saw uncertainty. Then he roared, "No!" and raised the pistol. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. Behind him, a door slammed open and several masked men stormed in. It wasn't the police, nor journalists. It was Dietrich's network. The warehouse filled with chaos. Shots rang out, screams echoed. Reinhard's men went down, one after the other. Reinhard himself stumbled back, seeking cover behind a barrel. I used the moment, hauled Markus up, and dragged him towards the exit. He was weak, could barely walk, but adrenaline carried us both. Behind us, the battle raged. Reinhard shouted orders, but his voice was lost in the noise. Bullets whizzed, metal splintered. We almost reached the gate when suddenly Reinhard himself reappeared. Blood streamed down his forehead, but he was alive, and the weapon was still in his hand. "This ends here, Johann," he yelled and took aim. I spun around, pulled Markus to the side, but before Reinhard could pull the trigger, a shot rang out, but not from his gun. Reinhard staggered back, the pistol clattering to the ground. He stared at his chest, where a dark stain was spreading. Behind him stood one of the masked men, his weapon still raised. "For Dietrich," he said coldly. Reinhard gasped, clutched for air, and fell. Hard without another word. The warehouse fell silent. Only the echo of his body hitting the concrete lingered. I stood there, my heart racing, Markus at my side. For the first time in a long time, Reinhard was powerless. Dead. But instead of relief, I felt something else. Emptiness. Because it shouldn't have ended like this. I wanted to break him, not just see him die, but perhaps this was the only justice possible. One of the masked men approached me, pulled off his mask. It was the same man who had warned me in the bar that time. "It's over," he said. "Aurora no longer belongs to Reinhard. But don't think it will be easy. His network is bigger than you think. Today you won. But the war, it's only just beginning." Then he turned around and disappeared with the others into the night. I helped Markus outside. The harbor wind hit our faces, cold and sharp. "You have to disappear, Johann," Markus whispered. "They will hunt you. Everyone. Aurora is bigger than Reinhard." I looked out at the water, into the darkness, and I knew he was right. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The morning after the night in the warehouse was gray and heavy. Hamburg awoke. But for me, It felt as if the city were in another universe. Reinhard was dead. Markus lay weakened but alive in a safe apartment provided by the network's men. And I myself. I sat by the window, my hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, staring out at the streets. Was it over, or had it only just begun? On the table in front of me lay my phone. On it were stored all the evidence against Aurora. Audio recordings, videos, emails, contracts, and the final recording of Reinhard's own confession in the warehouse. If I pressed send, everything would be out there. Every journalist, every authority, every citizen could see who Reinhard really was and what Aurora had built over decades. But I also knew that as soon as I did it, I would become the hunted myself. Aurora was more than just Reinhard. It was a network of politics, money, and violence. Cut off one head and two more grow back. The door opened. Markus limped in, pale with bandaged arms, but his eyes clearer than ever before. "You have to do it, Johann," he said quietly. "Otherwise, it was all for nothing." I looked at him. "And what about you? They will hunt you just the same. You are one of them. At least you were." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Maybe I deserve it. But you can destroy them. I underestimated you, insulted you, betrayed you. But now I know you are stronger than all of us combined." His words echoed within me. All those years, he had called me an unemployed loser, and now he was begging me to save his life. I stood up, took the phone in my hand. My finger hovered over the screen. One press of a button, and it's all over. But suddenly the device vibrated. A new message. No number, no sender, just one word. "Stop." I froze. Whoever it was, they knew what I was about to do. Before I could react, the landline phone rang. I hesitated, then picked up. A cold, smooth voice sounded. "Herr Keller, you have no idea what you are risking. Reinhard was just a pawn on the chessboard. We are the game." "Who are you?" I asked. A soft laugh on the other end. "Aurora does not end with one man. Aurora is everywhere. If you publish those files, not only will you die, but also your daughter, your friends, everyone close to you." My heart raced. "Sophie." "Leave her alone," I pressed out. "Then leave us alone," said the voice. "The choice is yours. Delete everything, or you will lose what matters most to you." The line went dead. I stood there, the phone in one hand, the receiver in the other, and felt the decision tearing me apart inside. Sophie, my daughter, would I sacrifice her to bring down Aurora? Or would I spare Aurora to protect her, thereby giving up everything I had fought for? Markus looked at me. "Johann, you know what you have to do." I nodded slowly. Yes, I knew, but not in the way he thought. That same night I drove to Sophie. She was now living in an apartment on the outskirts, far from the city's hustle. I knocked. She opened, surprised to see me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I hugged her tightly, perhaps too tightly. "I just wanted to see you," I whispered. She didn't understand, but she sensed that something was different. "Is it about Markus? About Reinhard? I've seen the news." "No," I said. "It's about you. Listen to me, Sophie. No matter what happens, don't answer the phone. Don't talk to anyone. Trust no one but yourself. Promise me that." She nodded, confused but serious. "I promise." I left her within the same hour, my heart heavy, but my resolve clear. The next morning I entered the press building of a major Hamburg newspaper. In my jacket pocket was the phone with all the evidence. The editor, a woman in her mid-40s with alert eyes, looked at me in surprise. "And you are?" "Someone who is bringing you a story that will change Germany," I replied. I placed the phone on the table. "Everything is on here. Take it. But listen to me. If you publish this, it will be dangerous. Not just for me, but for you too. But it has to get out. Aurora must not survive." She studied me for a long time, then took the phone. "We'll make sure it gets published. But Herr Keller, you have to disappear. Immediately. As of today, Johann Keller no longer exists." I nodded. I expected that. 3 days later, the bomb went off. The newspaper broke the story. Other media picked it up. Within hours, the truth about Aurora spread across Europe. Corruption, manipulation, murder. Everything came to light. Politicians fell, Companies collapsed, accounts were frozen, people took to the streets, and I disappeared. Not as a coward, but as someone who knew he had fulfilled his duty. I left my name behind, my old life, even my daughter. It was the price I had to pay, but in a small drawer in my new hiding place lay a photo. Sophie as a child, laughing, full of hope. And every time I looked at it, I remembered. I was no unemployed loser. I was the man who brought down Aurora. Epilogue. Sometimes I wonder if Sophie understands why I had to disappear, if she knows I did it for her. And sometimes I dream of returning one day when the shadows have faded. But until then, I remain invisible, a ghost in a world I myself changed. Aurora has fallen, Reinhard is dead, and I, Johann Keller, have finally found my peace. If you like this story, then give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and write your opinion in the comments.